I'm just going to start with a bit of science and then we'll move on to marketing. Here you can see this slide from NASA. Our current carbon dioxide levels are 422 parts per million. This is a number that we should all know. Just like we knew the infection rates of COVID, this is something that should be on the pollen count on the weather, because this is about humanity's chance of survival. And as you can see from this graph, we have not exceeded this level for over 1 million years. We really do need to accelerate our pace of change. We're currently on track for a 2.7 degree warming, which, again, is not great. I mean, we've had extreme weather here in the UK, but we've seen disasters around the world. And I think what can happen, really, is you start to err towards doomism and defeatism. And you kind of see that in people that say, well, there's no point me doing anything because country XYZ isn't doing anything. There's no point me doing anything because I'm only one person in a team, or my boss doesn't commit to this. And actually what I would say to you is doomism and defeatism is the refuge of the privileged. We have an option. We have a choice. If you choose to be defeatist, then you are one of the lucky ones, because there's people around the world that do not have a choice. They don't have an option, and they are fighting climate change daily for their own survival, for their family's survival, and for their community's survival. So actually, this audience, we are the privileged. We are the 1%, and we need to move into a space of active hope. We need to represent the global community. And as Joanna Macy says, active hope is being active participants in creating the chance for hope to spring. So I'd really recommend Joanna Macy's book, Active Hope, for a bit of positivity. Slowly moving on. There we go. Bit of Fab 5 now, just to lighten it up a bit. And that's because I think we need to all have a bit more self-belief in the power that we have. We as an industry can sometimes be on the bit of a periphery. We expect ourselves to be a service industry, so therefore we wait to enact change, and we look for signals to enact change. But if the Fab 5 have taught me anything, it's all about self-belief and believing in your value. And so I think as an industry, we need to start believing in our value. We drive consumption patterns, we drive societal norms, we affect how investors see a good investment. We have more power than we realise, and we need to start using it. And so today, I'm joined by Matt and Sophie, and we're going to talk through a couple of case studies and ideas of how we think everyone within the advertising ecosystem can stand up and be counted and make the change we need to see.
Cool. I don't want to stand in front of you. Right, let's go over here. Hello. So I'm the media buyer of the chat, and I'm going to spend a couple minutes just talking to you guys around some of the interesting things we've found so far when we've been looking at how to make more sustainable buying, more sustainable principles in our buying, and how we sort of execute that. We've identified two key insights that we think are quite useful to share. We think this is all information that we want the industry to align around. This should not be competitive information. This is how we all create change, because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. But just to take stock, this is really why I'm talking here as a media buyer in this conversation as well. WPP put out their sustainability reports, and in that they sort of stated that 98.3% of our carbon footprint actually comes from Scope 3 emissions. And of that 98%, over half of it comes from the media supply chain. So that is emissions directly tied to the media we are buying as part of our services, right? So we cannot ignore the media buying and the media supply chain as part of our sort of net zero efforts at WPP and Group M and EssenceMediacom. We've committed to be net zero by 2030 within our supply chain, so we need to make a lot of change in the way we do things. And me and Laura have been working together on this for the past sort of 18 months, 2 years now, and we've sort of looked at lots of partners, looked at lots of data sources, looked at a lot of media vendors. And the big thing that we've really discovered, and the first thing I want everyone to really remember, is that ultimately this all comes down to technology. Technology is the major driver of carbon emissions within digital media buying in particular. And we're seeing this from Scope 3, the carbon emission data source. Their benchmark for Q1 in 2023 stated that 64% of emissions they saw within the media supply chains came from the ad technology used to actually buy and sell the advertising. And when we look at that through a WPP lens and we take out consumer device emissions because they sit outside of our current life cycle evaluation, that rises to 77%. So what we can take away from that ultimately is that we need to start to understand better the technology we're using to buy our ads, and we need to look at how we limit that and create value every time we add something new to the chain. And so we started thinking lots about how we're going to do that. And what we found was that ad technology is very drastically different across all the different sites we buy from, all the different sites and apps. So that is because each publisher, some publishers might be in the room, you all control your own ad tech stacks. You choose which supply partners you work with. You choose who goes in your ad set text file to say who's allowed to resell my inventory as well. And that sort of, those processes start to set out how much technology is actually used in the process of selling and buying every single ad on your site. And that means that we can start to create really interesting piece of analysis like this, where we look at every single site we've bought within a campaign for one of our clients. We can look at the scale of our buy across the X, and we can look at the carbon emission rate on the Y. And you can start to see there's a massive variety there, and that creates a lot of room for us as media buyers to very quickly optimize our campaigns and reduce the emissions we're delivering. That's something we've already been doing with several clients over the past few months. In particular, Sophie works for MPB, one of our clients. And back in Q3, Q4 last year, we undertook an analysis of all the programmatic campaigns we've been buying for them. We identified our benchmark pre-optimization carbon emission rate. And the simple step we took was that we identified the worst 10% emitting domains on our plan. We took those out, and we saw a 29% reduction in the carbon emission rate for the next month. And that also led to a 7% redistribution of the investment towards those lower carbon publishers. So taking quite a small step, taking 10% of the sites out of our inclusion list, did not impact performance in the slightest, and reduced our emissions by almost a third. And that's quite a major step that's very, very easy for lots of different agencies, brands, and buyers to take. But this isn't just about what we can do as buyers, because ultimately we buy from publishers. Publishers are our partners, and we want them to change. We want to help everyone change. We want to help the industry change. And so the other myth we wanted to sort of dispel quickly was that buying more directly and moving to a more direct form of buying, either an IO or a guaranteed buy or even a direct PMP, is not actually cutting your emissions today. And that is because the way that the technology works within programmatic advertising, publishers are still making bid requests to all of their SSPs in most of the time. And so they're still generating the same amount of carbon to sell that ad, even if you personally have bought it in a more responsible and direct route. So when we have lots of conversations with people, we want to be really, really clear that we're making good decisions, but you're not always going to see this, the response straight away. And that's something you need to take into account when you're considering your options. But that doesn't mean we should stop doing it, right? Because ultimately, as buyers, we have a lot of power. We control where the money comes from, and that controls what decisions publishers make further down the supply chain at times. And so it is inherent that we need to create and establish and enforce more sustainable buying principles across all walks of agencies and buyers in the industry, and start to put our money where our mouth is. And if we can start to put our money into more of those direct routes, and we can start to coalesce around more consolidated supply paths, more consolidated partners, that is going to enable publishers to actually make the right decisions that they want to make for their business, which is to start turning off longer supply chains that aren't creating any value or only adding very minimal revenue to their income. And that's really where we need to go as an industry, because we can make optimization decisions as a buyer, but we actually need to encourage the publishers to be able to make the changes as well to create systemic change in the industry. So my last sort of 3 points to wrap that up is that what can we do to make change easier as a media buyers? We can control and shorten our supply paths. We can consolidate and work with fewer SSPs. We can look at limiting the resellers we buy from to direct paths wherever possible. It's not always possible, so don't cut it out completely, but you should look at doing that as much as you can. And you should consider, do you really need RTB to execute your buy? Can you move it to an API-driven buying model or something that is less intensive for every impression? Talk to the publishers that are important to you. Not every publisher that you're working with today is going to be good right now. That some of them are going to need some help and some encouragement and some direction. And so we don't just want to turn publishers off. That is not how we want to move forward. We want to be working closely with our partners and establishing a better way of working for the future. And finally, it's asking, should we, not could we? Basically, are you getting value from everything you add into your buy? Do you want to test that new piece of tech because it sounds really cool and you can put a new logo on the presentation? Is that really a good enough reason? So that's really the big question. It's just, should we be doing this extra thing? Is this going to create more value for our clients, for us, for the world? And if it's not, don't do it, consolidate, and be a lot clearer and more direct with what we're doing. And now I'm going to hand over to Sophie.
Worth introducing MPB. If anyone is a photographer in the room, you will have heard of us, and everybody else won't have. We're the world's largest platform to buy, sell, and trade. You are? Very good. We're the world's largest platform to buy, sell, and trade photo and video kit, based in Brighton, and have premises now in Germany and in the US. So we are firmly circular economy, one of the biggest marketplaces in the UK, if not the biggest, I would say, at this point. And I'm really lucky as a marketer that I get to work in a brand where the purpose is completely built into the business model and everything we do. And I think that's quite unusual and a little bit terrifying, actually, for the rest of my career, maybe. So I think, though, that we have a responsibility to start being louder. We discovered during the prep for this session that we're all very gobby on this topic, and I think it's a good thing. We're all marketers, I think, are natural-born communicators. That is really our function within an organisation. So I would urge everybody to use that, I guess, personality trait and role within the organisation to start to drive change. I think there's two places that marketers need to drive change. One is consumer behaviour. It's really important. I mean, I would go so far as to say in choosing the brands that you're working for, and then when you're working for them, making sure that the behaviour you're driving is the right one. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can get people to sell more, because actually selling behaviour as part of the circular economy is not particularly well adopted, so that's something that we address a lot. And also for us to be using our voices internally to be driving a sustainability message and action within our organisation. I think quite an interesting trend for sustainability departments to start reporting into marketing, which is how it works for us and also other brands I've been talking to recently. And it seems to be something that works well, I think, because of the communication angle. And also, honestly, I'm happy that I have a sustainability expert who can help me, because I'm responsible for not having greenwashing messaging in anything that goes out of the door. It's really important that we take responsibility for greenwashing, because marketers, I think, are the last stop for that one. And it's not easy. I'm not suggesting it is. We all have full-time jobs, most of which don't involve anything to do with sustainability. Everybody's very busy. We're in an economic downturn, so everybody is very swamped, probably with lower budgets. Agencies are very swamped, I get it. We're all doing the same thing. So it's not simple, and I'm not suggesting you have to become Laura, who is a deep expert on sustainability. You hopefully get to tap into Laura. But I do think everybody needs to try and learn at least enough to understand how they can make change. We work with One Tree Planted. I think it's quite a well-known brand within the UK and globally. So for 3 years we worked with One Tree Planted around our Cyber November campaigns. The first year we used it as an acquisition tactic. And whilst lots of people will tell you that they buy and sell things because of sustainability reasons, I think it's a nonsense. They don't. So it doesn't work as an acquisition tactic, at least not for us. It's become a retention campaign for us during a period where we now say over-consumerism is wrong and we don't actually want to engage in Cyber November. So it's been trial and error. We haven't got everything right, but we've tried. And I think that's really important, that everyone just thinks if I left the room and did something more than I would be doing at the moment, that would help. I would also say, don't make assumptions, because it makes an ass out of you and me. Because I think there's an awful lot of misinformation or complex information that's difficult to get your head around. But I've made assumptions along the way, and I've heard assumptions recently talking with senior marketers. Actually, I sort of always assumed, our operation is buying and selling cameras. We've got big warehouses. We use a massive courier network. Our digital media, which is not an enormous plan, I would have to say, is our single biggest carbon footprint within our organisation, which surprised me a lot. And obviously, we're working on reduction. We're working on removal plans. But I think it's really important that everybody goes and finds that out and figures it out. The other thing I think is that there is an assumption that things are going to improve. I was in a conversation recently where they said, well, AI means that we're not going to have to do physical shoots anymore, so that will help with the flying, carbon footprint of flying. But actually AI has a massive carbon footprint, most of which is not talked about, pretty invisible, not understood. So I think before we all steam into AI, which I know is the hot topic for everybody in the room, we need to really stop and think, do we know what the impact is? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And I do think digital equals invisible, and that makes it quite difficult to figure out. So my final plea is use your voice. You know, as I said, people, I think, communicators in the room know that they've got one, and I think there is a voice to be had externally to talk about sustainability and to do it well and to not greenwash and make sure you keep yourself and your organisation and your partners honest in that one. But I think probably the bigger impact you can have is drive the agenda and some action internally. And remember, I guess, that we're looking for progress and not perfection, and I think that way we'll be able to have a bigger impact.
Cool, thank you. So Matt's pointed out that we need suppliers to sort out their business. We need marketers, Sophie's pointed out, to be more vocal and put pressure on all of us to deliver, and even just ask the question, what can agencies do? And I think agencies, again, we tend to wait for signals from clients, or we tend to pass it down the line to suppliers. But really, we need to start giving ourselves some agency in terms of how we address what is a crisis that is happening now, not in the future, and we need to act. At EssenceMediacom, we have 3 pillars, and again, I presented this last year, actually, to help sort of simplify our approach to sustainability. The first is behaviour, the second is our work, our output, and the third is our influence. And if we apply this to our industry, you start to think, okay, behaviour. We've got just shy of 20,000 industry practitioners here in the UK. That's a decent amount of people. Imagine if every single one of us asked a question or challenged a brief or educated ourselves on the issue that we were most passionate about. Secondly, our work. Group M estimate that we're about sort of 40 billion mark this year in terms of spend, and we know that money has a major impact. And in regards to our influence, now controversially, I'm going to quote Purpose Disruptors, 32% increase on the carbon footprint of every individual in the UK that is driven by the advertising industry. And yes, that methodology has been disputed publicly, but fundamentally, I think as an industry, we can all agree that advertising does have a bigger impact beyond the impressions that we buy. We all know this. That's why we do it. It's fun. We see our work in popular culture. So I think these 3 points mean that we all have the ability to have more impact than we realise. So thinking about our behaviour, our behaviour as agencies, what could we do? Well, I think first and foremost, we need to have science-based targets. We all need to have science-based targets, and we all need to have media included within those science-based targets, because that makes you accountable, and it means that you can't manage what you don't measure. We all need to be measuring our media. We also need to make sure that everyone is coalescing around one single methodology. We don't have time for competition. We need to really get into a space of collaboration and pre-competitive behaviours. We need this to have the impact that we can have. And I'd also urge everyone that behaviour-wise, if you are still doing business as usual, then you are not progressing the conversation as it needs to be had. We all need to challenge status quo. And this doesn't necessarily mean to be disruptive or angsty. This is about challenging the status quo with innovation, with thoughts, provocations. You might not have the answers, but we need to start asking the question at every single point, because it needs to become commonplace. In terms of the work that we do, we are brilliant at talking about data. We've got audience data, we've got signals in media in terms of behaviour. But I think really as an industry, we need to look beyond our bubble and look at what's happening in the world. And what do we need to do? We need to look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We need to start with the science. A lot of the time, we answer briefs with how can we sort out this brand problem? What we need to be thinking is, how are we sorting out this brand problem, and how is it contributing to the UN Sustainable Development Goals? The UN Sustainable Development Goals are the world's to-do list. We're halfway in September, and we're nowhere near halfway through achieving them. And these are the basic principles for a fair, equitable society. These are the most important thing that we should be working towards. Also, in terms of behaviour, we talk about behaviour change. We know that the UK government has recently reported 74% of the UK population are worried about climate change. So everyone's worried, but what are they doing about it? Not that much. So about 25% of people are using renewables, 25% are refillable, sorry, and about 22% of people are buying second-hand clothes. Again, how can we catalyse that behaviour change? And also, I think in terms of the messaging that we're giving, sustainability isn't resonating. Sustainability feels abstract. And there's a great report by Accenture called One Human Moment, which is all about the fact that the way corporations and advertising talk about sustainability doesn't resonate with everyday people. We actually need to move away from that. We need to be relevant, and we will need to move away from being righteous. Being relevant means that you can talk to audiences about being frugal, connecting with community, restoring green spaces. All of these efforts, if we go back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, are sustainable behaviours. We don't need to label them, we just need to make them happen. And finally, maybe the elephant in the room, but we need to start thinking about what a new metric of success is. Linear growth, profit maximisation has gone. We are in a low to no growth economy. And that's not going to change anytime soon. So I think what we need to start thinking about is what are our ability to drive success outside of that. And again, the WFA and Kantar project with Sustainable Marketing 2030 is a really useful document because it has steps to embracing the circular marketing principles. And I'd recommend having a read of that. And I've been recently thinking a lot about behaviour change, and something that's really true is that our behaviour changes when our beliefs change. So what is our belief of ourselves as an industry? What do we believe to be true of ourselves as an advertising community? At the moment, I suppose you could say that we believe that for every pound you spend, you drive £6 into the economy. What does that belief lead us to, and what do we deliver based on that belief? What if we changed our belief? As a collective, what if we decided something else could be a marker of what we stand for? For instance, could we drive the UK from position 19 to in the top 10 of the happiness index? And that might feel a bit woo-woo, but the happiness index, oh, put my teeth in, is something that governments have got consensus of now. They see it as a marker of well-being. And I think this could be something that, if we decided to do it, how would that change the decisions that we made and the actions that we took in our day-to-day roles? So, finally, imagine this in 2030, everything that everyone has talked about is implemented. We've seen radical innovation. We've seen true commitment and focus to transitioning to a net zero society. We've got a more cohesive society. You're more likely to bump into your friends and neighbours at the repair shop or the library of things rather than a department store. People are working less, because AI is doing the heavy lifting, but also because we don't need to work as hard, because energy is cheap, because it's renewable. Life is good. This is what's available to us. This is available to us now if we start to work towards it. But at the moment, that's not the path we're choosing. We're choosing a very opposite path at the moment, and we have the ability to accelerate the change in this space. So I'm going to end on a quote, because that's what agencies do. I would say that this quote for me is resonated when we were pulling this deck together. The power of creating a better future is contained in the present moment. You create a good future by creating a great present. And I would really, really urge you all to think about the impact you can all have with that one conversation, that one challenge, or deciding to read that one book and leaning in and making a difference. Thank you.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. I've got time for questions. If anybody, we got some in the audience here. We'll have a couple. Straight to Norman.
Thanks a lot for this insightful presentations. One question: when you strike out 10% of the publishers, there are two questions. How do they react, and do you communicate that? So is that something they try to get back in, so they are aware of, or is it just money is going away? That's question number one.
Yeah. So in that case, that was a performance buy across the open exchange. So it was done as just we made the decision in the DSP, the team did. So there wasn't really communication with the publishers at large, just like any other buyer is doing when they're optimizing a campaign. But that's why we do advocate that you should talk to partners that are important to you. You should be looking at where you're spending most of your money, who those publishers are, where they rank right now, and then prioritizing who you need to go have those specific conversations with, because we don't think we should be moving money out of quality environments with trusted publishers just because of this. We want to help everyone go on the journey.
It's probably worth saying that we have set up a working group with a bunch of premium publishers, and we share with them their carbon footprint for every 1,000 impressions bought. And we're actually doing a workshop, I think on Thursday, to show some of the highest carbon footprint partners why we're going to start removing them if they don't address it, but also share the learnings from the lower publishers to say this is what we've done in our ad tech to reduce our carbon footprint. Because again, we want to raise the bar for the industry. It's not about exclusion, and we need that education to happen. So that's happening in a more focused way.
Thanks, you answered the second one.
Excellent, thank you very much. Let me just come over to this gentleman over here. So if you could pass the mic along, that would be fantastic.
Hello, thanks for that. So made-for-advertising websites are apparently one of the worst offenders in terms of carbon emissions because of their multiple versions, the ad load, the refresh rate. You mentioned you've got about £40 billion of spend according to the recent A&A programmatic study, both in the open marketplace and in a private marketplace. About 20% of that is spent on made-for-advertising websites. So putting aside their questionable effectiveness, in relation to sustainability, they are perhaps one of the worst offenders. So you've probably got about maybe £8 billion worth of that spend currently going on those sites. What can be done by the agencies? £40 billion to spend, 20% of money going on made-for-advertising sites. Maybe that's not all in digital.
I was going to say, my 40 billion was the whole of the UK advertising market.
All right, so it's so globally, I don't know where Group M is, but it's probably not far off that figure globally.
That's advertising, not digital website.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Digital, whatever you are on programmatic, it's going to be a big number. Okay, the 20% is going to be off a very big base. So you're in a privileged position to perhaps do something about that. I'd just be really interested to hear your strategy on made-for-advertising websites in relation to sustainability.
So in relation to sustainability, we have carbon emission data down to a domain level. So we can make very specific domain level decisions on how each site ranks. And what I think it's made for advertising as a advertising context is a slightly different discussion, right? Which I think we could talk about for an hour separately, so I won't get into that now. But we're making very specific domain level decisions here to optimize. So we are identifying the sites that are higher than the averages or the targets we're setting for those campaigns, and we can decide to exclude those or move money to more efficient publishers. What I would say is MFA is quite bad. There's also a lot of other sites that are quite bad that also represent some quite quality premium publishers that might be represented in the room today. And so I think it's important that we look at all of the partners we're working with and start to work out how we build a full framework of decisions.
We actually found quite a lot of sustainable websites, as in like sustainable content websites were really carbon heavy, because what they were trying to do is optimize on the massive trend of interest in sustainability. So obviously they'd created a massive long tail as well. So
So you talk about websites that are promoting sustainability that are
sustainable content. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So it's really, and this is why data is important, isn't it? So like it's interesting when you look under the hood. What is driving carbon and some of these, again, to assumptions that you could make. But there's some really good publishers out there with very high carbon footprints that need to be addressed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I mean, the questions could go on. I look forward to hosting you again next year and see how we've progressed.
Only if we've sorted the industry out.
It's a piece of cake. We'll get it done. Yeah,
People
by
be
next
doing
week. I was particularly
campaigns.
interested when you were talking about the impact of AI on the CO2e for the industry. So again, that might be something we would cover next year, but thank you very much. And linking quite nicely into that,